What's up, herbalists? This is Mason, and you're listening to HerbRally. Our goal for the show is to help you along your herbalist journey, no matter what stage you're at. Today's episode is a replay of a webinar that we co-hosted with herbalist and author Maria Noël Groves. In fact, Maria just came out with a new book. It's called Herbal Remedies for Sleep: How to Use Healing Herbs and Natural Therapies to Ease Stress, Promote Relaxation, and Encourage Healthy Sleep Habits. And that's what today's episode is all about, a primer on herbs for sleep, indications for popular herbs. So in this webinar, she focused on commonly sold sleep herbs, including chamomile, valerian, passionflower, hops, and more, as well as including the who, when, why, how for each, when each works best, and not so much. So Maria is an incredible teacher. She's a great author, but she's also an incredible teacher, and she packs a lot of information in this hour. So you're going to have a ton of takeaways. Also, Maria was kind enough to supply us with the slides. So if any of you would like the PDF download of the slides, I will leave a link to the landing page to download those slides at the tippy top of today's podcast show notes or the YouTube description. So yeah, if you're listening on the audio and you want to see the slides as she's going through this, just check out the YouTube video. I'll be sure to leave a link to the YouTube video as well. Also, before we get into the show, 2 ways you could help support HerbRally. If you wouldn't mind leaving us some sort of written review and star ranking in your podcast player of choice, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc., that would be absolutely amazing. Always brings a smile to my face when I read those reviews. So thank you to all of you that have already left us a review. If you're watching on YouTube, if you could just go ahead and like the video, maybe comment, share the video on social media, really helps grow the show, and we super duper appreciate it. So that's going to do it for my rambling today. Enjoy today's episode with none other than Maria Noël Groves on herbs for sleep. Talk to you soon.
Yeah. Smoking herbal blends. We need some Mullen and some Kush, my brethren. While listening to HerbRally Podcast again. Herbalism at its finest with Mason Hutchinson. Yeah.
Awesome. And thank you, Mason. It's always an absolute honor to be here on HerbRally. I love the content that you share from me and from everybody. And it's just really a wonderful, wonderful resource that you folks have put together. And so I'm just going to rejigger a few things on my end so that my view is so that I can see things a little bit better. And so we are going to be talking about herbal remedies for sleep. And I do have a somewhat similar class I've done elsewhere that's out there in the ethers. So for this particular talk, how I'm going to change it up a little bit is that while we are going to focus on the indications for some of the most popular herbs for sleep, being chamomile, valerian, passionflower, and hops, I'm also hoping to be able to kind of squeeze in a lot of other herbs. And so as we get into it, I will also be asking for your input, and you're more than welcome to put that into the chat, and what herbs about sleep that you're really hoping to learn about. And so I am going to take your cue. I've got a bunch of different slides as options, and we'll fill in probably the last 20 minutes or so with some of those other herbs, or at least that's the plan. And so I'm going to dive right in. Also, you will have access to the slides. Mason's going to be sharing that in the landing page info with the replay and all of that. And so when you're looking at the slides, the ones with stars, that's kind of a note to you and to me that starred slides I'm not really expecting to get to, or if I comment on them at all, it's going to be more briefly. But I like to throw them in there because I am a total oversharer. I talk fast. I try to share a lot of information, and a lot of times I do a little bit too much information. And so those little stars are to kind of be like, this is extra for you, but not necessarily things that we'll be really chatting about much. And then I also underline things in the slides, and most of those should be hot linked to open up different resources for you. So you can check those out once you get the PDF of the slides after the fact. And so I am Maria Noël Groves. I'm a clinical herbalist. I practice in New Hampshire, as you already heard. And I have 3 different books out right now. So Body into Balance being the one that most people know about. Grow Your Own Herbal Remedies. It came out a few years ago. And Herbal Remedies for Sleep, which is part of the reason why we're here, just released in April. And so it's a newer book. And I do have another book in the works. I can't say what it's about yet, but I have another book that will be releasing next spring that I'm also super excited about. And so my practice is threefold. I see clients, I teach classes, teaching being one of my favorite things to do, although I love all the rest. And then, of course, the third part is my writing, initially as a journalist for magazines, and now less of that and more for the books. So that's the short version. I have done plenty of odds and ends podcasts and videos with Mason in the past. And so if you want more about me, you can check out my herbalist hour that I did on HerbRally a year or so ago. So here are pictures of the 3 books, and Herbal Remedies Herbal Remedies for Sleep having just come out. And I have tons of information on my mailing list and on my website. So you can check those out at wintergreenbotanicals.com, being the main clearinghouse. I'm also on social media too. And I think the safety rules are really important, but an hour is such a short class in my mind. I know some people do like 10-minute and 15-minute videos that I can't even comprehend. Most of my classes are between 3 and 6 hours long. So for me, getting things into 1 hour is a lot. So these are really important safety rules, but we're not going to go over them. You'll have them in the slides that you can refer to. And I do want to, even though I have a star on this slide, I want to note and recognize that big picture of sleep support beyond just the herbs. We're going to really focus on the herbs in today's talk just because we don't have much time, and that's what we're really passionate and excited about. But the big picture matters so much, and it matters more than the herbs. The herbs are a wonderful tool in the toolkit, our allies as our friends, to help us with our paradigm shifts and get out of habits that have become ingrained in our body that aren't necessarily super healthy. The herbs can be really amazing to shift those. However, there's a whole deeper lifestyle piece, as well as whatever the underlying root causes for you are for why you're not sleeping well. And that ultimately matters more than the herbs alone, especially for that long-term consistent support. A lot of times, if you ignore whatever the underlying root cause is, even if you find an herb that works really well for you, you may find that as time goes on, it just doesn't work quite as well. And so some of the biggies, there are so many pieces to good sleep hygiene and underlying root causes, but some of the biggies, of course, one is stress support, and the herbs can be also helpful with the paradigm shift of that, but also just taking a look at our lives and doing what we can to integrate more restful living to the best of our abilities. As you can probably tell from the way that I speak, I can be stressed too. I'm an more anxious personality. So these are kind of our things to constantly be sort of working on, but trying to create a lifestyle that's a little bit more supportive so that we're more resilient to stress. Avoiding evening stimulation. This is a biggie. And especially as we get older, and especially as folks go through peri and postmenopause, we tend to become even more sensitive to those stimulants than we might have been in our younger years. And so stimulation can come in the form of overly stimulating entertainment, vigorous exercise later in the day. Exercise is good, and some exercise is better than no exercise, but ideally doing that exercise earlier in the day. Even things like supplements, like taking a multivitamin later in the day, even for some people, a multivitamin at all, especially those B vitamins, might be too stimulating for some super duper sensitive people. But even the average person would usually do better having their multivitamin in the morning with breakfast versus later in the day. Some of the adaptogens can be stimulating, especially for certain people. So whether you have them at all or you have them earlier in the day versus later in the day will depend on the person. Certain pharmaceuticals can be stimulating. And so sleuthing that out with your practitioner to determine, can we take it at a different time of day, or is there a different medication if that's affecting your sleep? Caffeine, of course, is a huge one. So keeping that more earlier in the day or less of it, or maybe even none of it at all, depending upon who you are as a person. Our work lives, as we have started to work more and later, and it comes into our lives in a lot of different ways, a lot of times our work ends up being too stimulating later in the day. And so trying to maintain healthier work-life balance, screen time being another big one, both the light of of the screens that we're looking at and the content of what we're doing on those screens can be stimulating. And then, so, having that time before bed to start winding down, to have a relaxing ritual, to dim the lights, to shut off the screens, to do something relaxing that's a nice ritual for you, can all be really wonderful. And working with those circadian rhythms of like light exposure during the day and less light in the evening, so that we can stimulate healthier wake sleep balance, cortisol, melatonin balance. So those are some of the biggies. Also, there are a lot of hidden saboteurs, which in the book, I'll just kind of share herbal remedies for sleep. In the book, we go into a little bit more, and then I am going to be doing a sort of free 4-part webinar series on sleep that anybody who has the book from any source, you can get a promo code and attend it for free. So that'll be 4 times 2-hour workshops. So we'll get much more into that there. But I want to note that beyond just stress, blood sugar roller coasters, sleep apnea, let me move my chat screen so I can see a little bit better what I have written down here. Come on, where's that? There we go. Okay. So blood sugar roller coasters, sleep apnea, hormones, especially associated with menopause, postmenopause, perimenopause. Those are some things that oftentimes are disrupting sleep, especially for folks who maybe fall asleep okay and then wake up 4 hours later or in the middle of the night or early morning and are like, bing. And all of them have a surge of cortisol, which is one of our stress hormones that's associated with wake time. All of those things will cause the body to sort of flood cortisol or other stress and wakefulness hormones into the body at the wrong time of day. But they can have different things that are underlying why that's happening. And so those are 4 really common causes that I see in my own life, as well as my clinical practice, that are helpful to sleuth out, because if you can get that root cause in better place, a lot of times the sleep will follow, and you can work with the herbs to support you in those particular root causes, as well as with sleep simultaneously. And you'll often get really a beneficial impact there. Also, other things, usually people know if these things are bothering their sleep, but pain, digestive issues like reflux, urinary issues like having to pee, although all those things I just mentioned that tend to be more hidden with that surge of cortisol, those things can make us need to pee in the middle of the night. So sometimes if you get them addressed, the needing to pee in the middle of the night is dramatically reduced. And then any other disruptions, maybe you have a new puppy, or you have a snoring spouse, or you have kids that, are rolling around on the bed with you and kicking you in the face. There are other things that can disrupt our sleep that are a little bit trickier, that are outside of our bodies, at least. So with that in mind, I welcome you. Let's see, I see we already have Jessica, who's requested lemon balm and catnip. I don't think I have a slide for catnip. So if we have time, definitely give me a shout out, and I'll try to mention a little bit more about that one towards the end. And I definitely do have a slide on lemon balm, so I'll keep that in mind. But anybody else who has any herbs that they're really hoping that I'll talk about today, go ahead and put that in the chat. And then if you have questions, you can put in the chat, but the Q&A box is even better for questions. And I will do my best to answer them either as we go along or towards the end. So starting in on some of our starters, and I'm just going to gloss through this first part because I think we have talked about most of those things. Each herb has a personality. And so it's really nice to find those that match. You can start off with the intellectual level of like what I'm sharing today, as far as what some of the specific indications tend to be and what each individual herb tends to do really well versus another. However, ultimately, it's going to be about your relationship with that individual herb in your body. So listening to your intuition, listening to your body as you try out small quantities of herbs, and then slowly kind of work them in. That's going to be the best way to get to know whether your personality gets along with the personality of that individual plant. And many of the herbs that we're going to talk about today have immediate benefits. Many are also good with long-term regular use, especially alongside looking at that big picture. And many of them also, it really, really matters for quality and freshness. And so a lot of times I prefer them from your garden or from a farm versus the bigger international market, as well as, a fresh plant tincture or maybe a really nicely, freshly dried tea being some of my preferred ways to work with things. Glycerites can also be wonderful for some of the herbs, usually a little gentler than the alcohol extracts, but still really nice. Here's just a little chart from my book, Body into Balance, on stimulating to more, strongly sedating herbs. And we're going to kind of fall a little bit more towards the end of the line, the more calming and sedating herbs. And a little slide on general dosing. It does vary a little bit by herb and by person. And when you're just starting out, it's nice to start with a small dose, see how that herb affects you. And then once you know it's okay, you can slowly increase the dose to just make sure that it's something that agrees with you. And thank you to those of you who are putting herbs into the chat. So just some basic things. We're going to focus mainly on the sedatives and the relaxing herbs, especially initially. And then as we get into a little bit more, we might cover a little bit more of the less sedating nervines or nervines, the herbs that nourish the nervous system. Those ones that are more nervine or nervine, but not overly sedating, are often nice day or night. So if you are more anxious or stressed during the day, you might be able to take some of them during the day and at night just to support your patterns throughout the whole day. Whereas usually the more strongly sedating herbs, most people do better with them just at bedtime or at the higher doses in bedtime. But it also really depends on the person too. I'm not really going to focus much on adaptogens. They do have a place. Sometimes people like to do adaptogens, especially in the mornings, to help reset healthier stress and wake sleep cycles. But in my mind and in my practice, when people are dealing with sleep and anxiety, my first go-tos are those nervines that are nourishing to the nervous system and gently calming, as well as possibly those stronger sedating herbs. And then if it was appropriate to add, a perimenopause support herb like shatavari or shatavari is one of my favorites, or some blood sugar support, like maybe a little cinnamon or a little bit of fenugreek or some other herbs based on what's going on with that person can be helpful. So yes, Mason will be sending out the recording probably around the weekend at some point in time. And so by next week, you'll definitely have access to the recording, and it will also get posted online. So some of the most popular herbs in commerce, we're going to start off with some that are a little bit more on the sedating side. So there are a few cautions, particularly with this sedative group. With each herb, there are pros and cons. No matter what we're talking about, there are always pros and cons to everything. With the sedative group, even though that's our most famous group of herbs for helping us sleep and helping us relax, often taking it at bedtime or if we wake up in the middle of the night, there are some times where they don't always match up well. And it could be individual, maybe only certain herbs in the sedative category affect you negatively, whereas other ones might be okay, or it may be across the board for the whole category. And that depends on you for the most part. But one would be if there's sleep apnea, which is really very, very common, and not just in the people that you think of who would stereotypically be snoring loudly and have apnea. If you have apnea, sedatives are often going to make that worse. So if you take sedative herbs and you feel like you're actually sleeping worse, you're waking up more, you're feeling more groggy in the morning, maybe you are or are not waking up, but you're not feeling good, you're feeling more tired during the day, I would be suspicious about sleep apnea. There are other reasons that could be happening to you, but that's one of them. Also dry mouth, headaches, falling asleep easily throughout the day because you're so tired. And there are lab tests that can be done, and there are sleep studies that can be done. And a lot of our devices now can also measure oxygen. So there are a lot of ways to get assessed for apnea, but if you're concerned, certainly ask your doctor as a starting point. Some sleep disorders may respond negatively to the stronger sedatives, and that's because they can sometimes cause a little bit more paralysis. So if somebody has a little bit of sleep paralysis, that could be a problem. And I should go back and clarify too, for the apnea, part of the reason is that, our body is waking up in apnea because it needs oxygen. So if you make it harder for your body to wake up, that might mean that you're getting even less oxygen throughout the night. So that could make you feel groggy or more fatigued during the day. But also sedatives can depress respiratory capacity and relax muscles. And those things could also make the apnea happen more frequently. So I know from myself, from doing my own at-home oxygen tests, that for the most part, I'm pretty good with that in my, postmenopausal state. However, if I take too many of some of the sedating herbs, things I used to be able to take just fine, but now post-menopause, I'm in a slightly different state. If I take those herbs, then my oxygen starts to dip down. So I have to be really careful and turn to some of those gentler nervines and stress support and the big picture stuff a little bit more than going to my immediate, knock myself out herbs that I used to be able to take when I was in my 20s. Also know that some of these stronger sedative herbs can aggravate depression for some people. Again, that really varies by person and by plant. So, hops or sometimes passionflower. I'd say hops is a little bit more common. Valerian for some people, even skullcap, which for most people is awesome and totally fine. Every great now and then somebody finds themselves feeling a little bit more in a funk if they're taking larger doses or longer term use in particular. So just something to keep an eye on. And if you have a tendency towards depression, you may want to stick with herbs that are a little bit more uplifting in nature, like say lemon balm is one of my favorites because it's great in almost any situation. Daytime use might be too sedating for the really strong herbs, but some of the more gentle herbs are totally fine, and it's also very individual. If you're on sedative medications, there can be synergy, so they may relax you a little more, which might be okay, or they might worsen the apnea. They might make you more apt to fall asleep at the wheel. They might depress your respiration or your heart rate or your blood pressure by combining them. So sometimes it's not a problem and sometimes it is a problem. And so medication examples would be sleep medications, anxiety medications, most of our antidepressant medications, some of our pain medications, and a few others like some of the anti-seizure medications, and so on. And usually that's a pretty well-known caution. So you might be able to just ask your pharmacist. And just especially in that extreme high dose or extreme response or drug synergy, that's where we tend to see more of the overt possible dangerous side effects. It's very rare with the herbs that we're going to end up with, decreasing respiration or dropping heart rate, but it's possible in somebody who's super sensitive or on medications, or if you're doing really high doses of the herbs. So there are other random ones, but we'll get into the herbs. So chamomile. I really want to start with this one because I think it's easy to forget about chamomile. I know I forget about chamomile since I'm a little bit allergic to it, but I'm one of those anomalies. And most people do really well with chamomile. And it's so accessible. I mean, almost around the world, you can find chamomile tea available for sale at the grocery store, or, in almost everybody's house, they probably have a box of chamomile tea kicking around. It's certainly very popular throughout the United States, throughout many of the countries of Europe, throughout Mexico and Central America and other areas of the world as well. And it's generally really well tolerated, except for those few people who have allergies to it. And if you were allergic, especially to daisy family flowers, I would be a little bit more cautious with chamomile, but it's not that common. And even though it's in the ragweed family, a lot more people are sensitive to ragweed than are sensitive to chamomile. So particularly if you know that if you hold a bundle of daisies, that aggravates allergies, if that was the case for you, I would be very cautious about chamomile. But if you can have a bouquet of daisies in your house and it doesn't bother you at all, then you might be totally fine, and just approach it cautiously the first few times. But beyond that caution, most people do awesome with chamomile. It's quite effective for sleep and calming the nervous system, but yet has very few negative side effects. And it's safe even for babies. It's one of our classic baby herbs, all the way up into elders. And there's been quite a bit of cool research on elders in living facilities, as well as postpartum, having issues with sleep. And of course, there's that long classic use for babies who are irritable or teething. It's a bit of a pain reliever. It's really helpful for when we're feeling very fussy and cranky, whether we're babies or not. That's a way of looking at it that I learned from Rosalie, who I think learned it from somebody else, maybe David Winston. And so when we're acting like fussy babies, chamomile is a really good one. Or when we just feel like a fussy baby, when you're just like I'm just not really in a very good place, chamomile would be one of those herbs to consider. The research on chamomile has generally been very good. There have been quite a few human studies that have come out recently that have found chamomile to be helpful for reducing generalized anxiety, as well as for supporting sleep in a variety of situations. And in some of the studies, they compare it to a class of benzodiazepine drugs. And that is a pretty common class of drugs used for anxiety and depression, anxiety and insomnia. And in many of those studies, it worked almost as well as the benzodiazepines with a lot fewer side effects. Benzodiazepines are highly addictive and have a lot of negative long-term neurological symptoms, whereas the herbs like chamomile and passionflower, being another herb that has done very favorably compared to benzodiazepines, generally they don't seem to have those negative side effects, and they're definitely not addictive. So that's pretty cool. And it's just little old chamomile, this like classic herb that Peter Rabbit was given after a stressful day in the garden. And so another benefit to chamomile beyond just basic like cranky and fussiness and anxiety and sleep would be that it's a phenomenal digestive support herb. And so we know it as being really classic for colic in babies, as well as gas, bloating, indigestion, gut healing, tends to be really wonderful for a lot of digestive and nervous system. When we see the nervous system and the digestive system affecting one another, chamomile is one of the herbs that we might think about almost immediately. And a lot of people really, really resonate with it. It's most classically consumed as a tea, which is a wonderful way to have it for digestion as well as for sleep. But it is still effective in other formats as well. So it's totally fine as a pill. It's completely fine as a tincture. You can do a glycerite. You can work with it fresh or dried. And it's really just these cute little flower tops that we're generally going to be working with that have that kind of pineapple-y, hay-like aroma, a little bit of apple, a little pineapple, a little bit of a hay flavor. They are kind of bitter if you steep them for a long time. So they'll get more medicinally sedating and also better at enhancing digestion when you make a really bitter extract. But you do get a lot of the calming benefits from the aromatics as well. So if you don't like bitterness, you can just steep it for a couple minutes. Or if you want it to be more bitter and you want it to be a little bit stronger, you could steep your tea for longer. And getting chamomile from a box from the store works, but getting chamomile directly from a farm or from your garden, usually the quality is going to be a lot better and a bit more potent and definitely better tasting as well. So let's see, how long of a steep would result in different effects? So for me, the steep time has more to do with how strong, what kind of a flavor you're getting from it. So you can do, a few minutes and you'll get some gentle relaxation and a nice flavor. Or you could do maybe like 15 minutes or even longer, and it'll start to get more bitter. But as it gets more bitter, because you're just getting a stronger extract of everything in the plant, you'll also notice greater sedation. I know Rosalie de la Forêt has a great story about, I think it was her husband who was making chamomile tea for her, and he did it wrong, quote unquote, and overbrewed it. And she's like, ugh, like I shouldn't have asked him to do this. And then she took it and was like, whoa, like I am out. Like that was really relaxing, and realized how much more potent chamomile can be when you steep it for a long time. I'll admit that I don't have a lot of personal experience because I am very allergic to chamomile. And so it's not one that I have worked with a lot for my own experience and my own sensitivities of things. But a lot of my clients have done really well with it, especially if they're having a lot of that nervous indigestion and gas and bloating at the same time. But even if you're not having those things and you just want to support your sleep, chamomile is a great, great consideration. Awesome. I see another question, but I'll get to that in a bit.
Just a quick break from the show to let you know about the HerbRally events page. Did you know that we add new herbalism events from all over the United States and the world for that matter on an almost daily basis? You can peruse herbalism events at herbrally.com/events and hopefully find something in your neck of the woods. You can also search by state to make it even easier to find a plant walk, conference, or class near you. And we also list virtual herbalism events as well. Check those out at herbrally.com/virtual. And again, for the in-person events, go to herbrally.com/events. All right, back to the show.
So passionflower is another absolute favorite of mine. And this is definitely one of my big go-tos in my practice. I'd say when I first got into herbalism, sleep was one of my personal issues and still remains one of my taskmasters. But I had insomnia after a stressful experience in college. And that's what got me into herbs. I ended up taking valerian for sleep, kava for panic attacks, and did a lot of deep work on my trauma support as well. And so for a long time, valerian was one of my big go-tos for sleep. And then as time went on, I started to get an even greater appreciation for passionflower. And so that's why we're coming to passionflower next, because I feel like it's an herb that is very helpful for a lot of people across the board. It's a plant that is very unlikely to have allergenic potential. I mean, anything is possible, but it's very uncommon that people are allergic to passionflower. It's very uncommon that they're going to get agitated by passionflower. And so a lot of people will notice a relaxing effect from this plant. And it's pretty potent while still being a relatively gentle and well-tolerated plant. And the research on it for sleep is some of the most impressive in terms of getting good results and from a variety of different formats, even just like a quick and very small cup of tea having a profound effect. In one of the studies there, they just used 1 teaspoon of herb, which for me, like I use like heaping tablespoons of herbs in most of my teacups. So it's just like 1 flat teaspoon steeped for 15 minutes. And they found in one study that it relieved insomnia. And then in another where they were using an extract, I think it was a pill form. It wasn't a tea. I don't remember what form it was. They did a blend of different herbs. And in that particular study, that they found that the blend of herbs, including passionflower, worked as well as Ambien. And there are quite a few different trials that have been coming out on insomnia, as well as especially anxiety, finding it very helpful for symptoms and oftentimes comparable to those benzodiazepine drugs with way fewer side effects, generally not a high side effect plant, minus those general cautions that we already talked about for the stronger sedatives. And even with that, passionflower is kind of like sometimes they happen, sometimes not for those general sedative cautions. So the kind of general vibe of passionflower is that it's cooling, calming, just kind of like chills you out. If you're already well rested and you take an herb like passionflower, you'll feel like in this weird Zen state, like you just came out of meditation or yoga class and you're just on a cloud. But if you're tired, it's usually going to help you feel more sedated and fall asleep and less anxiety. This is also a classic herb for cooling excessive, if people are too much, too strong, too hot, too angry, too fiery, too anxious, hot-headed, restless, lots of mind chatter. All those are scenarios where passionflower is it's literally like our chill pill. It just calms us down and kind of relaxes us quite a bit. Tends to have a relatively fast action, usually within 15 minutes, especially in a format like a tea or a tincture. The liquids absorb a little faster than the pills do. And it will last for at least a couple hours, usually. Some people can take it during the day to help with, anger and frustration and anxiety, whereas some people might find it a little bit too relaxing to take it by day. And you can do blends. Like we have a really great herb shop in Exeter, New Hampshire that has a tea blend called Solace. And so she combines all these beautiful herbs together that make it this really nourishing, nervous system calming tea that you could take day or night. And passionflower is one of the herbs. That's the Alchemy and Herb Shop in Exeter, to give a shout out to her and her blends. But This is a great herb to work with as a tea because it also tastes okay. You can easily enhance the flavor with other herbs in the blend, and it's relatively effective. Even though if you've got freshly dried passion flower, it's more amazing. It's really hard to get really perfectly freshly dried passion flower in the market. And what we get from good quality companies like Mountain Rose Herbs is still really good. And that's usually what I tend to work with in my own personal apothecary. If you happen to have it growing, so I have it in a pot because we're in New Hampshire and it will not survive our winters, you'll want to make sure to get the Passiflora incarnata species. And you can tincture the above ground parts, ideally when it's in bloom, because the blooms are just really stellar and have their own aromatics and medicine, but in along with all the leaves and things. And if you're in a warmer climate, it can be planted in the ground. It might even get a bit invasive, so be careful about that. And it can really amble along if it's in a climate that's warm and humid and doesn't get too cold in the winter time. It's definitely on the edge here. So the dosage for sleep it really varies. So I would go back to those general dosages that I gave at the beginning in the slides. So start with a couple drops of anything, whenever you're just getting, a couple drops of a liquid extract or a small cup, a quick cup of tea, and see how that feels in your body. And then you can adjust. But I'd say a typical dose for passion flower is usually about 1 or 2 milliliters. And that is true for most of the herbs. But passion flower is one that a lot of times you'll see an impact on the lower range of like just 1 milliliter. Whereas some of the other ones, people might bump up to like 2 or 5 milliliters, which about 1 squirt of a dropper is about a milliliter, just to give you an idea. Let's see. Is it that the market quality for passion flower varies more than other herbs? If so, why? So I would say that the market quality for passion flower is generally pretty good. This is one that you usually can't find it at local farms anyway. But if you get it in the bigger international market, it still works really well. That's the form that I personally work with. But if you do happen to have it fresh or freshly dried from your own garden, or maybe you found a local farm that sells it, if you do manage to get it fresh, there's like more of that actual like passion fruit flavor and aroma that you get from it that definitely gets lost with drying, but it still works nicely as a relaxing herb. I have not had a whole lot of opportunity. I mostly appreciate my plant for its looks and have done very little medicinal work with it. But there's a difference in the flavor, but it still actually works quite nicely medicinally. Some of the other herbs that we'll get to, especially lemon balm, holy basil, which we may or may not get to, those ones I feel like are vastly better when they're fresh. And if you are working with them dry from a farm or from your yard versus the international market, because the aromatics get lost very easily in the process. But passion flowers, somewhat sturdy, if you will, compared to some of the other herbs we'll talk about. I have not started it from seed. I usually buy it from places like Strictly Medicinal Seeds or Companion Plants and get it shipped through the mail in the springtime. You can also do it from cuttings, I believe, if you have somebody. And this is one where this species is important and it's often misidentified because there are so many cultivars and other species. So you want to get it from a really trustworthy source. But that's good to know that the seeds are hard to start. I am not a seed person personally. So yeah, so this is a great herb to consider, but it is more sedating, somewhat sedating. So it is one that I might still bother, say, sleep apnea or something like that. So keep that in mind, and you would want to be cautious introducing it alongside medications. Always keep your doctor in the loop before you add in herbs with meds. So here's a tea. So there was a question earlier about the tea, and I'll get to that in a moment. But here's my favorite sleep tea recipe that I made many years ago in my early herb student days. And it stayed to be one of my absolute favorites. And so it's just approximately equal parts passion flower, skullcap, lemon balm, and spearmint. And for this tea, I usually do work with them all in dried form. Passion flowers, the heavier hitter here when it comes to sleep, although next in line would be skullcap and then lemon balm. And even though, for example, lemon balm is vastly more potent as a relaxing herb when it's fresh, it's still nice as a tea, and I like it in this blend. And then I usually throw spearmint and some honey in there for flavor and brew it small and strong. So about like a heaping teaspoon or so, 2 flat teaspoons or a heaping teaspoon per 4 to 6 ounce teacup. Steep it for 15 to 20 minutes, sweeten it, and then enjoy that in the evenings after dinner, before bedtime. It tastes really good, especially with the honey and the spearmint. And it's another one of those blends that works well for a lot of people across the board, from kids to elders. Just being mindful to introduce it gradually if you are, say, on a medication, to make sure that it's not too sedating alongside it. So lovely tea there. And then let's see, there was a question, and then I want to make sure I answered all the parts of it. All right, so because this is on page 68 of my book, Body into Balance. So are these herbs fresh or dried, or does it matter? So yeah, I did answer that. So I work with them dry, just because herbs usually release themselves better to a tea when they're dry versus when they're fresh, unless they're herbs that are just like super duper aromatic. So holy basil, fresh, summertime, yeah, totally. Lemon balm does a decent job as a fresh tea, but as a general rule of thumb, dry herbs are going to release to the water extracts much better than a fresh herb, because when you put fresh herbs in water, they want to suck the water in, and you want them to release and give up the ghost. So most of the other herbs I tend to work with more often as tinctures, and these also do work quite nicely as tinctures as well. Let's see. Oh, I have a whole slide on reputable suppliers. So we'll go to that, and towards the end, that's in the slides. We may not talk about it, but it's in the slides. Yes, you can. Tracy's asking if spearmint is interchangeable with other mints, and it totally is. Whatever mint you like the flavor of that you have access to. I will say that peppermint tends to be a little bit more energizing in nature, but it's more from just the aromatics than that it's literally stimulating in the bloodstream. So if the peppermint tea is something you like and it's not too energizing for you, then by all means go for it. And there's a little video you can check out of me doing that. So valerian is next up on the list. And this one is the classic go-to, especially in the 90s when I first started to get into herbs. Valerian was one of the biggies that you would think of for sleep. Initially, it was one of the best researched herbs for sleep. But best research just meant that a lot of studies looked at it. The actual results of valerian and sleep were very persnickety. They really were across the board over whether it was effective or whether it was impressively effective. So overall, it seems like from that research, valerian works better for helping people fall asleep and not so much for other aspects of sleep. But from the herbalist perspective, it is, we have a little bit more nuance to it than the studies get into. And so energetically, valerian is a more warming herb versus for example, the passionflower is a little bit more energetically cooling. Doesn't mean that if you're cold, you can't use passionflower. You certainly could, but it's a little bit more cooling to that like excitation state, whereas valerian tends to be kind of a bit more warming. And so valerian as a warming herb tends to be better for people who run cold and anxious versus the people who are running hot and irritable, for whom I would think of other herbs such as passionflower as being more specific for those folks. Also, it is a muscle relaxer, which makes it potentially good if there's a lot of tension in the body. So tense, anxious, cold, usually thinner framed people tend to be the group that does a little bit better with valerian, because it just kind of like warms up that cold, relaxes the muscles, calms them down. And it does seem to bind to similar receptor sites as Valium. And these would be the GABA receptors, which are really what most of the sedating herbs seem to interact with our GABA receptors in one way or another. But for the record, Valium is not made from valerian. It was not really inspired from valerian. They just happen to have similar names. So that's one of the urban myths there. So let's see. Some people feel groggy, though. This is the interesting thing with valerian. Sometimes people feel groggy with it. It's a little bit more apt to happen with it, especially in those folks who are larger bodied, tend more towards frustration, tend more to get overheated really easily. Usually those folks don't tolerate valerian as well, and they may either feel groggy or they feel really agitated and stimulated. And that's just a general rule of thumb. I know people who are like, hot and larger bodied who do great with valerian, and other people who are cold and thinner bodied who don't do well with valerian. So it's just a general rule of thumb to help give you some guidance. And ultimately, you can just listen to your body on this. We're working with the roots, and I personally prefer working with the roots fresh as a tincture. I think they're more effective in more cases when they're in that format. But you could make tea, and there are some people who really like the tea. If you have not yet ever experienced valerian in person in real life, it stinks. The roots are really, they're funky, they're smelly, they kind of are like perfume and dirt and stinky feet and skunk. And the smell gets worse as it dries. So it's a little bit more pleasant, but still weird and not great as a fresh plant. And so most people don't really want to drink it as a tea, and it's a little bit more apt to be irritable for some people in a tea form. But for those people who do well with it, I have met people who have grown to love the smell of valerian and love having it as a tea because they associate it with the relaxing quality. I also want, one of the theories for why some people get stimulated as if they've drunk caffeine when they have valerian is that perhaps they're not metabolizing some of the constituents very well, that they're not breaking it down. I don't think there's been any research to really tell us exactly what's happening there. Another theory, though, is that it is an herb that would be more apt to bother sleep apnea. And if your apnea is being agitated, you'll be more apt to be groggy the next morning or feel more stimulated at night as the body is flooding you with cortisol to try to wake you the F up to get some oxygen. So which of those things is going on, I don't know for sure, but I will say that valerian is very quirky. Some people do great with it, and a lot of people don't do well with it. So it's not my first go-to these days because it is a little bit more persnickety, but for those people who do well with it, it really is pretty phenomenal. So yeah, it's definitely stinky feet as an aroma. And yeah, it is pretty easy to grow. The flowers smell kind of nice. And I do work with the flower essence as well, but also for deep peace and deep sleep. But the roots are really the part that we're most often working with. And you can work with them in a variety of ways, but my personal preference tends to be with a tincture. So hops, another key herb. And so this one is often worked with in combination. A lot of times you'll find it in combo blends for sleep, especially pills and tinctures or liquid extracts, because the flavor is also kind of not the best. It tastes like an IPA beer because hops is also what we use to make IPA beer. And so it's very bitter. It's very aromatic. If it's a fresher extract, it can also be really, really acidic. And there are a variety of constituents in hops. It's actually related to cannabis, and it has a lot of the same terpenes, the aromatics, as cannabis does. And the myrcene is one of the terpenes, the aromatic constituents that tends to be more sedating. But there are other things like the lupulin that is in the hops that is also kind of sedating and more unique. And hops does not have the cannabinoids that cannabis has. It's also a little bit phytoestrogenic, and it tends to be a little bit more of that like stronger, sedating, also anti-inflammatory, also has that phytoestrogenic effect. So if somebody is dealing with hot flashes or menopause, hops definitely has more of like a feminine estrogen kind of energy to it, and has more a history of being used for supporting estrogen in folks who have ovaries, and not necessarily used in super large quantities in folks who have testes. That it has had a reputation for causing, for example, erectile dysfunction in brewers who are using lots and lots of hops. Whether or not that's true, I don't know, but that's certainly the reputation that it has. So hops is one that can sometimes make people a little bit more depressed. So you'd want to be careful introducing it. It's one that is sometimes too sedating to take during the day. So I had a client years ago who had been recommended by the store to use hops for pain. And then she checked in with me at the follow-up and said, "Hey, taking hops for pain, what do you think?" I'm like, "Well, I mean, yeah, it could help, but it's pretty sedating." And she's like, "That's what it is." She's like, "I've been so tired. I'm like, I'm falling asleep every day." So, well, yeah, it's a sedative. So a lot of times I might put it in people's nighttime blends for hormone balance, but not in their daytime blends personally. It is also bitter. It does also lower blood sugar. So that's something to keep in mind. That might be good or not good for those blood sugar roller coasters. Maybe good if you're having it with your dinner, but if you were having it right before bedtime, you might find your blood sugar getting lower, and that might not be great. Energetically, this is a more cooling herb compared to, say, valerian, which is more energetically warmer. And so it is a great herb, and I do love it for some things. And sometimes it really hits on, you're like, ooh, like this herb does a lot of things that would also help this person who's dealing with a lot of those things. But then there are other times where it might not be as appropriate because of all the other side benefits or side effects, depending upon who you are in your body and what you need. It is a vine, and we're working with these strobials, which look kind of like flowers, and you harvest them when they're putting out their little dusty lupulin. Let's see, some folks love the smell. That might have been for valerian. So what do we have for herbs? We've got 15 minutes, and I know we had a couple of requests. We got a request for California poppy, lemon balm. I think there might have been another one in there. I think skullcap. So we'll kind of poke on through. So lemon balm, I will say, I have a whole video, like I have a short video on HerbRally that I did several years ago. And then if you're in the HerbRally schoolhouse, there's a longer video that I did just on lemon balm. And coming out in the next week, I have a 1 or I think it's a 1 hour long podcast that I did with Rosalie on Herbs with Rosalie podcast on lemon balm as well. So you have a lot of other lemon balm resources you can find on me. So I'll just hit a couple highlights because it is one of my absolute favorites as just a gentler nervine that's not too sedating, really unlikely to have a lot of those cautions that I mentioned for sedatives. Almost never happens with lemon balm. It's usually really well tolerated. It can be nice and relaxing by day or night without being too sedating. And I've had folks have very profound benefits for sleep with just lemon balm tincture alone. This is one that I think is much, much better if you're having a fresh plant tincture that you made yourself, that you've made recently, like in the last year or so, using the technique of making tinctures that I do. And I have a whole tincture blog out there. But basically, you chop up your herb, you shove as much as you can humanly fit into your jar, like really shove it in there, and then cover it to the tippity top with the highest proof alcohol. I use 190 proof or 95% alcohol. So higher than your usual 100 proof by quite a bit will make a better extract. You can use what you've got, but it does better both in stability and strength with the higher proof alcohol, and let it sit for at least a month and then strain it out. And that stuff's amazing. And I have not found any readily available commercial sources that work as well. When I was chatting with Rosalie at the end of the, after we stopped recording, she recommended Seja Popum's company. And so you don't usually see that one in stores, but I did order one, and that one is really good. So, and there may be other ones directly from herbalists that are really good, but I've yet to find one that impressed me that was on like the general that you buy off the shelf at the store. So, and I haven't tried them all, but I've tried quite a few of them. So make your own. It's a really easy plant to grow, but apparently Seja does have a really good quality one as well. And so lemon balm, lovely. I do like it as a tea as well. It's not as strong as a tea as it is as a fresh plant tincture, but it's still nice. So I love to blend it with other herbs in tea form. And it's uplifting. It's a little digestive. It's like gentle yet profound. It helps with focus by day. So folks who are dealing with sort of like scattered focus, but also need to be calm, but they don't want to be sedated. Lemon balm is a great one. And, so many other things. It's just a really, really pretty cool plant. But in the interest of time, I'll move on. I will say that holy basil does a lot of the same things I just mentioned for lemon balm, but it also tastes really, really good as a dried herb, as tea, again, especially if you grow it yourself or you get it directly from the farm. So places like Oshala Farm, or if you're local to New Hampshire, we have Terra Basics. Those folks do really such a great job handling their holy basil. Or if you grow your own, that's still my favorite, is the holy basil that I grow and dry myself. Personally, I don't sell it, but I'm saying for you, this is a great plant to grow, harvest, make fresh plant extracts, dry it for tea, And it's pretty amazing. And it blends really, really well, fresh or dry, with lemon balm. And a lot of folks really love this as a tea with their dinner because it helps lower blood sugar. So having it with your meal or just before your meal is going to be better to get the blood sugar curve in the right direction. On an empty stomach, I would add a little honey to it so that you don't end up tanking your blood sugar. So, but with a meal, unsweetened can be really lovely and can be really nice at night to help with digestion, stress, sleep, blood sugar. I've had quite a few clients do really well with it. Also, folks who are dealing with hypervigilance at night, where you're having a hard time relaxing because you feel like you need to be either on the go, doing things, or protecting yourself. Holy basil, lemon balm as a combo, maybe throw a little rose petals in there too, can just help us feel a little bit safer and calmer in our bodies. And it tastes good, which is nice, and they're beautiful. They also make really great water infusions. So in the summer, when they're in your garden, you can throw fresh holy basil, maybe some lemon balm, maybe some rose blossoms into your water, your plain water bottle, and give them some time to steep. And it's just very refreshing. And it's not as strong as a tincture or a hot tea, but it still gives you some aromatics, and it can be a really nice way to relax during the day in the summertime. So you can do cold still water or cold sparkling water. Both work really well. Sometimes with the lemon balm, I'll take that tincture and put like a squirt or two of tincture into plain seltzer or lemon seltzer and add a lemon wedge, which makes it taste a lot better and look cooler. And that can be lovely to have during the day or in the evening to enjoy a nice beverage. So that's become a favorite of mine. We have a few more minutes. Let's see, and 6 more messages. The name of the company for lemon balm. So that would be Saja Popham. Oh, I can't remember if I think there's an H in the middle, in the last name. That I can't remember the name of the company, but I think if you look him up, you'll be able to find it. He does a lot of really cool spagyric tinctures out on the West Coast. And I did mention shatavari for sleep. I don't have a slide on shatavari, but our shatavari, that is a great one to consider in perimenopause and in dryness when you're not sleeping well. It's very subtle. So I'll put it in the chat here, but so shatavari. And so that one it's an asparagus root that they use in Ayurveda. And it's most often, that one I tend to prefer as a powder or a pill. I usually use it as a pill. And something where I'm actually eating the powder so I can get the most of like that mucilaginous moistening property. And it's really classic for supporting yin. And there's been some new neat research, very impressive results funded by the company. So grain of salt there, but on sleep and perimenopause, it seems to be really helpful. And I've definitely seen that personally in my practice. You don't always notice that it's working. Like with all these other ones, you take it that night, you feel more relaxed. With the shatavari, it's like you take it for a while and slowly your symptoms just seem to get better. And then you're like, this is doing much. And you stop taking it and you're like, whoa, I guess it was doing something because now everything's come back. So hot flashes, night sweats, waking up because of perimenopause symptoms, or just being excessively dry and stressed, I would say that's where I tend to think about the shatavari. Let's see. There's so many good questions, but I think I might not get to all of them. So I'm just going to mosey on through because we only have a few minutes left. So magnolia bark. This one's a little bit harder to get a hold of because it's not really available in commerce outside of Chinese medicine suppliers. But if you have a magnolia tree in your yard, I tend to work with the star magnolia that grows up here in New England. The bark is really lovely as a alcohol extract, or you can also find it as a dry herb for pills. Not as effective, it seems, as tea. And that can be really nice for stress response, cortisol. And so for a lot of those underlying sleep saboteurs, not the sleep apnea, but some of the other ones, magnolia bark might be lovely to throw into the formula or use solo. And it tastes really good. You can put it in seltzer too if you want. And there are different companies that do sell it commercially in formula or solo, but it's a little bit harder to find. Skullcap I think of this herb especially for like kind of just calming for people whose central nervous systems are just up a few notches too high. They're extra sensitive, and they're finding, every little thing irritating. It's very nice herb for both calming muscular and nerve tension, and also helps for digestion as well. And even in pain, muscular or nerve, sometimes it helps with those, sometimes it helps with restless legs, but also just the folks who are overly like irritated when they're not sleeping well. So they're like, oh, the breeze, there's too much of breeze. Now I'm too hot. Now this fabric is itchy. My spouse is breathing. It's really annoying that my spouse is breathing. That's keeping me from sleeping. There's a sound, that bird outside is, that kind of brain is a really good one to think of for skullcap. Skullcap is often adulterated in the market. So you only want to get it from trustworthy suppliers. And on top of that, it's also very delicate. And if it's not handled just perfectly, you lose a lot of the beneficial properties of it. And so this is one I highly recommend getting dry direct from the farm. And I have some farm recommendations on the slide that's coming up on suppliers, or grow it yourself. And if you grow it yourself, don't even trust that what you bought. Like, go on Seven Song's got a really nice blog, and go through the identification to make sure you really have the right skullcap, because even within the skullcap group, it's often misidentified and mislabeled. But we're using the above ground parts of the Scutellaria lateriflora. Some other species like marsh skullcap also have similar properties. You can do a fresh plant tincture, or you can dry it for tea. I know Thomas easily feels like the dry herb is more sedating and the fresh herb tincture is more of a nervine. I haven't really done side-by-side comparisons, but I do love it in both those formats. And thank you. So Kate added that it's naturasophiasphagerix.com is Seja Popham's company. But also you can make your own lemon balm tincture. It's so easy to do. It's a really great plant to grow in the garden. Or if you know anybody who grows herbs, they probably have lemon balm in their gardens, and they probably have more of it than they need and are happy to let you harvest some. Blue vervain, particularly good when there's like physical or emotional tension, muscular, skeletal, neck, shoulder, headaches. It has many different benefits and much nuance. There are some really lovely podcasts and herb profiles on the HerbRally website that you can check out on blue vervain to get to know it better. But I love working with it either in low doses like drops, or sometimes a little bit more as a tincture to help for relaxing tension. It's not my immediate go-to for sleep, but when we see those patterns happening, we might turn to it as a solo herb or put it in a formula. It can be magic for folks sometimes. Kava is a great relaxing herb that's just sort of sedating. I tend to work with all the other ones more often because they're more sustainable and don't have, the liver toxicity controversy and other things, and they're easy to grow in the garden versus kava that is a little bit more at risk and has a little bit more controversy, but it does work well. So in a pinch, I usually keep that one in my first aid kit for immediate use sometimes. California poppy, I tend to think I don't work with this one as often, to be honest. But when I tincture it, I do the whole plant, including the root. The root is a little bit stronger, so having all those parts is great. It's a gentle, sort of like across the board, relaxing herb that also has some pain relieving, kind of nerve numbing effects, if you will. And so it's not a very strong pain reliever, but if there's pain and sleep issue, California poppy, something I might think about. Some people really like it for that sleep-wake cycle component because the flowers open and close with day and night. So it's considered a doctrine of signatures. I've got opiate fuzz. It's not really opiates. It does not contain opiates, but it contains other constituents that have sort of similar but non-addictive and very, very safe properties that are kind of like a super mild opioid, but it's not really an opioid. And bratty moods, whirling thoughts, those are some of the indications for California poppy. Motherwort, especially when we're feeling like that heart palpitation, where we're feeling overworked and underappreciated, and we're going on all these emotional roller coasters. It is very quickly grounding, relaxing, and over time just really mellows out our mood a little bit in a nice way. That's the short answer for that one. And we are out of time. So I'll just kind of note that I do have a whole slide in the slides that you can check out on different favorite sources. And for most of these plants, a lot of them are really best if they're homegrown or directly from a farm, because a lot of those aromatic ones are pretty delicate. But for some plants, like the passionflower is one that I will get from places like Mountain Rose or Star West or Pacific Botanicals. But for the most part, I would aim for homegrown or from a farm. And for big brands, I do really like Gaia. Urban Moonshine makes really good formulas. And then there are lots of other really great companies as well. So I've got extra little slides here. You can connect with me in a variety of ways. I've got my books. You can register for classes on my website. I do have a promo. So if you use the promo code HerbRally, all one word, in my online store, if you have the slides, you can actually just click right on it and it'll bring you to the store. It's a limit of one order, but you'll get 10% off your whole order, including books and classes and series. So make it count, but you can get a pretty good discount that way. You can follow me via my mailing list. I've got my website, wintergreenbotanicals.com. You can order books through me. And if it's in the United States, I will send signed copies. And I'm also on Instagram, Facebook, and I do a little bit on YouTube channel. Most of my YouTube stuff is not for the public, but I do have some free videos. And I will note too, Herbal Remedies for Sleep, if you have the book, page 178 will give you the promo code to sign up for that free mini sleep course that starts in June, and the recordings will be available forever. And my Home Herbalist series starts in just a few weeks, and that is live streaming and also available on demand. And I still have a few spots in person. We're almost out of remedy kits. So if you want in on that series, you can check that out. And that's my most popular series. It gives a good base of herbal understanding. My energetic series is new this year and only really happening this year. And I'm co-teaching that with Ji-Ling Lin and Tisha Love. And you can still join it, even though we're a couple classes in. We'll have our 4th class this Thursday. And those are all the biggies for right now. I have a Beyond the Home Herbalist series in the fall. So thank you all so much. I'm a few minutes over, so I apologize that we didn't get to everybody's questions, but you can check out the recording. You can check out the slides. Maybe you can catch me in that broader sleep series, and certainly, enjoy books. And thank you so much, Mason, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Maria, I'm always so impressed with your teaching. You pack so much into that hour. So no, really appreciate you coming on. And thanks to everybody for showing up live. I also wanted to point folks in the direction of signing up for your newsletter. Not sure if you mentioned that or not, but I want to say you come out with those about maybe once a month, keeping people up to date on all the different events and projects you're up to. I'm on the newsletter. I open every single one. So you could just go to wintergreenbotanicals.com, scroll down, sign up for the newsletter there. And yeah, definitely, folks, please pick up a copy of Herbal Remedies for Sleep. Help support Maria's work. So any last thoughts before we wrap up and get out of here?
Oh gosh, I don't want to take up people's time. I know I'm already over, but thank you so much. There's always more I could say, but thank you so much. And thanks for the mention of the mailing list. That is a great way to follow. So.
Of course. Yeah. I think I'm just used to saying that on the herbalist hour. So force of habit. But anyways, y'all, like Maria's mentioned, this will go live on YouTube pretty quickly. Should be on Friday, Saturday, and as well as the podcast as well. So you can tune in there as well if you want to just hear the audio version. But thanks once again for showing up live, and we'll talk to you very, very soon.
Awesome.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye. And that's going to do it for today's episode. Thanks so much for listening to the HerbRally Podcast. If you'd like to hear more from us here at HerbRally, we now have a text message community, believe it or not. Basically, it's just updates from us. We send about 1 to 7 texts per week, notifying you about new events, videos, courses, podcasts. You get the idea. It's pretty much like our email newsletter, just in text form. So if you'd like to receive text messages from HerbRally, just text JOIN, that's JOIN, to the number 541-256-2895. Again, that's JOIN to number 541-256-2895. And to stop receiving texts, that's easy too. Just text STOP to the same number. It'll opt you out immediately. Okay, thanks again for listening. Have a great rest of your day.